Hello, everyone. Welcome to Monday. It's the 8th of February, 2021. Well, we've had a lot to talk about lately, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about and watch this week. Arctic air is here, folks. A lot of you definitely felt it this weekend and over the last 24 hours. Now, that's for you folks that live in the northern and central Rockies and the western and central high plains east of the Continental Divide. If you're west of the Continental Divide, you're like, oh, I'm tired of the wind, but you haven't gotten the Arctic air. You better be thankful you've got that wind, because that's really holding back this Arctic boundary. Now, it's going to wiggle on the edges. And a lot of folks experienced that over the weekend. If you were in eastern Colorado or western Kansas or parts of southeastern Wyoming, you saw those big fluctuations in temperatures with that Arctic boundary. That's going to continue. Stock growers and travelers, you got to continue to monitor the weather and be prepared for the long haul. Stock growers, especially in Montana, central, northwest, northeastern Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, into the Central Plains. This Arctic air is just not a day or two event. This is going to go a week or longer, so you need to be prepared for the long haul. Now, there's big differences in temperatures based on where you are. If you're above 7,000 feet along and west of the Continental Divide, you're not in the Arctic air yet, and you probably won't be through the middle of the week. However, there's some indication that the coldest temperatures will arrive later in the week, during the second half of the week and the weekend. Well, there's still some question marks if that's going to happen. So we're not completely 100% sold on it, but our confidence is growing a little bit that this Arctic air may actually get more deep. And this has happened before. A lot of times, as we have mentioned many times in this podcast, La Nina winters are warmer than average, and they are. But sometimes La Ninas, you can have Arctic outbreaks. They can sometimes sneak in, and we'll show you where this happened before, and it's very interesting to show you the pattern that we had when this happened before. First of all, let's take a look at where we are right now. The polar vortex is sitting in the southern end of Hudson Bay, but it's a very large polar vortex. The coldest of the cold is right here, but it extends all the way back into the Yukon, parts of the Pacific Northwest, up into the Yukon and to the north slope of Alaska. What you'll want to see is how this evolves over time. Right now, it's generally more in an east-west fashion. So the Arctic air is right along the boundary edges here. And Arctic air, you need to act and think like it's water. It's always going to go to the lowest point of gravity, and the Arctic air is going to leak and go south along the terrain like this. We've already seen a pretty good southern extent push of that Arctic air. And you can see this is as of this morning. We'll draw this boundary right here as kind of the edge of the coldest air. And you can see the Continental Divide is really holding back everything. Anywhere you see gray here, you're below zero. So you can see how deep the cold air is getting. You see these pinks? These pinks, you're talking below 30 to 40 degrees or colder, below zero. So this is the setup right now. This is where the Arctic air is, the Continental Divide, and all the terrain features really playing a large role of where that cold air is going to go. Now, this is by Thursday. Notice that the Arctic air mass, the center of it was right here on that first map I showed you, but it actually retrogrades a little bit to the west and southwest, but it really hasn't made much of a push east or west, has it? It's just kind of spinning. And polar vortexes will do that, especially if they're getting cut off from the main jet stream flow. And we've got this tail of Arctic air slipping its way westward, back into British Columbia and poised to come this way by the end of the week. So this is by Thursday afternoon. So what we're going to see over the next 3 days is kind of what we have now, is what we're going to have for the next 3 days. Arctic air backing up against the Continental Divide, wiggling back and forth near that boundary. If you're in the Arctic air, you're going to have flurries, you're going to have fog. If you're at the Arctic boundary, places like Cheyenne, down to the Fort Collins, Denver, Colorado Springs area, you're going to see the Arctic air kind of come in, come out, and temperatures will be all over the place. 1 minute, it'll be windy and 40. Next minute, it'll be cloudy, foggy, and 15. It'll be kind of like that along the boundary. And if you live west of the Continental Divide, the western slope of Colorado, the southwest parts of Wyoming, into the Wasatch Front, into the Salt Lake area, you're going to avoid the Arctic air, at least initially. And that's how it looks through Wednesday. By Sunday morning, Look at the extent of the Arctic air and the sub-zero temperatures. Now this is potential. Sub-zero temperatures could actually get to the Texas panhandle and then backed up all the way. And then notice, oh boy, it gets west of the Continental Divide by Sunday morning. And you can see these pinks here. These are going to be really, really cold temperatures. Now, will this happen? This is a possibility if that Arctic air gets a push to the southwest. If the Arctic air decides to go more to the east, well, the Arctic outbreak won't be as severe. It's a foregone conclusion. The Arctic air is here. It's just how deep will it get, and will it get west of the Continental Divide? This is by Saturday afternoon. Notice the polar vortex has barely moved. It is still around. So if we go back up to where we are today, it's here. If we go all the way to Thursday, it's here. And then if we go all the way to Sunday, it's almost in the same spot. So basically the Arctic air is entrenched. And this little wave right here could reinforce the Arctic air and get it west of the divide by later this week and the weekend. However, I'm going to put a question mark here. We're not sure of that yet, because this Arctic air mass could get a kick eastward towards the Great Lakes by the weekend as well. So it could actually end up here. And if that's the case, well, the cold core moving east would keep the cold air from moving into the western side of the divide. So that is our the story that is going to unfold this week. And that's what we're going to be watching. Will the Arctic air get west of the divide? And also, on top of this, if this type of pattern sets up, we're going to have a low here bringing Pacific moisture over the Arctic air. If that happens, not only will it get Arctic, but you're going to get what's called an overrunning snow event here, where that Pacific air goes up and over the Arctic air and produces snowfall. If we were to go out further, this is Monday of next week. Arctic air will continue to filter in and will get all the way down into Arizona, New Mexico, and western Texas. Those areas will be looking at their coldest temperatures of the year. And if we were to zoom in and show you these temperatures, this is for the forecast as of today, for let's say about 5 o'clock this afternoon. The boundary of the Arctic air, and you can see the terrain features really show you where that coldest air is going to be. By Thursday morning, notice the colder air backs in a little bit. It gets pushed back to the west and southwest a little bit, and you're looking at single digits and teens in northeastern and eastern New Mexico, the panhandle of Texas, sub-zero temperatures out here. Look at minus 32 in portions of Montana by Thursday morning, with sub-zero temperatures locked in across northern and eastern Wyoming. By Wednesday morning of next week, look at this. These are potential forecasted temperatures by the early to middle parts of next week. We're talking about something that's long term. Snowfall, if that Pacific moisture comes in, will overrun that Arctic air and will produce some snow on the plains. We're going to again put a question mark on this, because for all of this snow to fall here, we've got to have that Arctic air get pushed back to the southwest. If it goes more east, that Arctic air, there won't be as much snow here. The mountains will get back into the snow, as there will be cold northwest winds flowing in behind that Arctic air mass. Now, I talked to you earlier about that this has happened before during a La Nina, and it's actually pretty remarkable. This is the current La Nina sea surface temperature pattern as of last Friday. Here's La Nina right here. We still have a lot of blues and greens, especially here along the equator where it really makes the most difference. This is where we are right now. Now, we've talked about the years of 2011 and 2012 as the last really strong La Nina, and that is definitely the case. We haven't had a La Nina this strong this year than going back to 2011. Look at sea surface temperatures for the same time frame in 2011. Now, the La Nina was stronger then, but notice the outline of the cold sea surface temperatures and where the warmer waters are almost, I don't want to call them identical, they're similar. They're very similar. This highlights why sometimes using history as a forecasting tool instead of computer models is a better way to go. So we have a very similar setup. So yes, La Ninas can give you mild winters, but occasionally you have Arctic outbreaks that get stuck. And this is what happened in 2011. In 2011, we saw the Arctic air mass bring record cold temperatures to New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma. It got a really big push to the south. In fact, in 2011, it was so cold that natural gas lines in New Mexico froze solid. They froze up and was able to really make a big impact on the energy situation in the southwestern United States in 2011. Not saying that's going to happen, but what we're saying is there's precedent. So in La Niñas, these Arctic outbreaks can happen, and the last time we saw something like this was 2011. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things unfold. Thanks for watching. I know I threw a lot at you. We'll be throwing more at you tomorrow. Stay warm.